So creativity is the thinking of novel ideas, and we've all done that. But innovation, of course, is the successful execution of a novel idea. I meet with lots of artists, lots of business people. I know lots of classically creative people in the world of arts. If they're a painter or a musician, they say, well, I haven't finished my music yet. I've got 105 pieces on my Mac in Logic, and they're all at the halfway stage. Or if they're an artist, they would say, I've got lots of paintings in my attic, but I'm waiting for the light to come right to finish them. That is not the kind of person you want to hire for your enterprise if you want them to innovate, because they will just say, but it's a matter of, the light has to be correct. So I think artists and innovation are interesting. They have to have that drive and passion, as well as all the great things that make them creative. And sometimes artists don't make good innovators, but that's not always true. You can have 3 levels of innovation. I've seen people written books recently that said there are 12, but in fact they're really just subdivisions of the 3. So strategic innovation is really about branding, transforming the basis of competition, stealing a march on someone. We've seen lots of great ideas in healthcare on that. I mean, the one-drop system, are you familiar with this? The insulin product that is a marvellous game changer. And previously there was the inhalable insulin, wasn't there, that Pfizer had, which wasn't a game changer, since the device was bigger than a fire extinguisher. And somehow they didn't notice that, so that was not a game changer. But more usually, of course, we're familiar with product and service innovation, sort of 3M post-it notes, your sort of standard things like that. And increasingly things that there's no physical manifestation of, apps and stuff like that. Also, there's improving the internal processes of your enterprise as well. And it can be incremental or radical. It can be sporadic or systematic. I was in Mauritius a few weeks ago with a finance company that said, we don't want too many ideas because in fact we're not an ideas firm, but we do need to increase the systematic amount of ideas that we have. And they wanted a culture whereby ideas would flow easily, but they didn't want them certainly to be too radical, because in the world of finance, let's face it, it's risk and return. So this relates to this point about what really is creative. Creativity in business, anyway, is both these things. Is anyone familiar with the work of Professor Michael Curtin? No. Well, he came up with 2 terms, one of which is very unfortunate. He said that people either had adaptive creativity, small steps forward, which is, frankly, most of innovation is about small increments. And he unfortunately called the other group innovators, which makes the adapters think that they're not innovators. He should have called them radical adapters, but somehow he managed to use this unfortunate term, implying that you're not innovative if you're one of these. The innovators are the sorts of people that thought about the steam engine, the genuinely radical creativity. And just to explain this a bit more, if we looked at this very simple system for climbing a hill, I think you'll understand why innovators aren't always useful. 2 systems going on here. Over here, the adapters, all working together. There's a lot of organisation structure, and indeed everyone's alive at the top of the hill. Over here, it's a lot more fun, real fun, and quite a lot of deaths. So, and you can get a score if you do your test, and the higher scores are these people, and the lower scores are those people. But actually, this sort of tends to prove that if your innovation doesn't diffuse into the environment, you are just a person in an attic, with a great idea. So beware of people who say they're radical innovators, because not all creativity leads to innovation. Some of you Italian from previous Frontiers conference. So Da Vinci, fantastic guy, but he did invent the helicopter 300 years too early. That is not really an innovation, is it? We've all probably invented the helicopter 300 years too early. And if you search the internet on mousetraps, you find hundreds of designs, most of which the mouse couldn't care about. I think there's even one mousetrap that actually has a Harry Potter sort of metaphor installed for the mouse, so that the mouse can decide which house, whether it's in Gryffindor or not. The mouse doesn't care. You know, so lots of people design things which nobody cares about. There's hundreds of better mouse traps on the internet. And this one, these are frivolous. That's not frivolous, but this is perhaps frivolous, but this is not. Pfizer's Exuberant device. Does anyone know the story of this, of how Pfizer spent billions of pounds to invent a device that didn't go anywhere? I mean, this is one of the devices. It's, you know, you're at dinner with your special friend and you say, I've just got to take some insulin. And it's a bit of a problem, isn't it? Yeah, because you look a bit stupid. How then did Pfizer not spot that the device was far too big? What was it? You know, because all drug companies study every small detail of everything they do on a new product. How did they miss this? Does anyone know? At the time, they had a chief executive that was sort of on the way out. And he said, because there were no products in the pipeline, this one's going to market. If anyone says anything different, read my lips. And everyone knew, a small child would know that this was a bad idea, but nobody would tell him that this was not going to happen because it was too important to fail. So when leadership says that this sort of thing can't happen, leaders have an incredible impact on what people are prepared to do. So no truths were told, and a 7-year-old could have told you that was going to fail, and then it cost them a lot of money. So, you know, creativity and innovation, they're different. And it doesn't have to be massive things. Anyone a fan of Tom Peters in the business world? He wrote this book, which I'm going to summarise in about a second, The Little Big Things. It basically says that little things make a big difference. And I noticed this the other week when I was flying to Mauritius. I just thought I'd put that picture in there. And I got on the plane and this woman almost immediately said, would you mind not having that seat by the window, because my husband wants it? And I said, well, okay. Although it was my first time to Mauritius, I said, fine. But her husband happened to be, they were travelling with family, he was the captain of the A320 Airbus fleet. So he came and sat there and he said, we discussed. He said, well, you can sit back in the seat when we go down. We had a long conversation, and at the end of the flight, he said, here's my business card. He said, if you need anything in Mauritius, then let me know. And I just thought, I don't know if you've ever travelled British Airways, but that sort of level of customer service doesn't happen on British Airways. So I thought very well of that, because he didn't need to do that. So I wrote an article about, little things making a big difference. And then the chief executive of Air Mauritius wrote to me and said, could I do some consulting for them? I mean, how easy is it to get work when that happens? But that was from a tiny little thing. And so people often think that ideas have to be big. No, they don't. You just have to sort of spot the obvious things some of the time. Anyone a musician? Play the triangle, play anything. Triangle? Yeah. You're not flute? Yes. Sax. Okay, whether you're musical or not, this is the music lesson. All music has a score, it has room for improvisation, and if it's good music, you'll have an audience. That's the music lesson. Same applies in business. You have things that you need to do that structure your work. I don't mean the organisational structure or the organogram, but you have routines, rituals, procedures, SOPs in pharmaceutical, things that mean you can program things rather than relying on doing it every time differently. You have some room for creativity, and if you're a good business, you have customers, partners and clients. Seems straightforward enough. Good businesses get the balance right. So if we think back about music for a moment, the goal of most music and musicians is to reinvent themselves several times, keep the audience they had, and get a new one. And I think the same applies. You don't have to like Madonna or David Bowie to sort of get this. It's not a discotheque. But they have, in fact, reinvented themselves several times, as have some other people, rather than being one-hit wonders, kept their audience and got new ones. So the same is true in business. So Virgin is a company I quite admire, but let's pick on a different bank. HSBC in Britain has an offshoot called First Direct Bank, and they're a telephone banking service. They have the same big data as all the banks. So they have exactly the same raw materials, they know about customers, everything about them. The difference is that First Direct actually use the information to relate to their customers rather than say, let's start at the beginning, what's your name? So if you compare them with Barclays, First Direct are a fantastically good bank, and they're the only bank I know that you can use the word love and bank in the same sentence. So we'll dig into those perhaps in part 2 a bit more. Can you learn anything about leadership, therefore, from musicians? Yes, you can. Here's a little interview we conducted with Sheila E, talking about what she had learned from great leaders, in this case her dad.
And you were also, long before your involvement with Prince, you yourself were a musical director and doing all sorts of things, and you musically directed for Prince. So what did you learn from actually trying to assemble the whole of a band and get them to play their parts to harmoniously? I mean, that's an important thing, really.
Yeah, that comes from watching my dad play.
Yeah.
He's been a leader of all of his bands, and with my uncle, with his brothers, he's pretty much been a leader. So watching him, how he deals with musicians, in rehearsals, and then when I finally went out on tour with my dad when I was 15, and I saw him at work, and just thought, he's just a cool guy. My dad is so awesome to watch him and how he treats people. He respects them like he wants to be treated as well. He's so early. You say show up at a certain time. He's there at least 20 minutes early. He's never late. He's on time. He's always prepared. And all of those things that I've watched him do instilled in me made me a better person, a musician, absolutely.
So isn't that the real thing? There's plenty of great musicians out there, but the professionals are on time as well.
True.
So isn't that the thing, actually? I meet loads of creative people, loads of entrepreneurs, and they go, oh, I haven't organised myself and I'm late. And actually the professionals in all fields, it's not an excuse to be creative and then be lazy or retarded or late. The reason Sheila E's working with Prince is because she's on time, and she learned that from her dad. So timeliness is part of being an entrepreneur, and she speaks a lot in the interview about sort of what she learned from her dad about treating other people. So that's really important, I think. There's a whole interview of this, which I've just cut a little piece out of. The question is, though, are you an orchestra conductor, a jazz musician, or a rock person? Because we can think about this in a slightly more developed way, that, perhaps in the beginning of the 20th century, Henry Ford would have perhaps said, well, you can have any colour you like, but they all have to be black. So in the world of stability, you can have a stable business, you can have bureaucracy, you can have a central leader that sort of says, here's all the information you need to produce the cars, you all do the same thing. We've left that era largely. A lot of people actually say that leadership is a bit like jazz, and I don't agree in this respect, that freeform jazz at the extreme is about everyone just diverging, creating, having a great time, and there's nothing coming out of it. Hewlett-Packard, of course, started in that way in a shed, didn't they? They're two men in a shed. And of course, diverging endlessly is great for an R&D organisation, but eventually you have to sell something. I heard someone say this morning, where's your money coming for this product? And that usually requires a bit more structure than being on the edge of chaos. Everyone's doing their own thing. This is like a hippie cult. Some jazz, of course, is not that extreme. But of course, most larger businesses usually have to have some structure and some room for the individual. I'm choosing sort of rock and pop music as the analogy here. Did an interview with Prince's bass player recently, but we did one a little while back with his sax player. And I said, would you mind jamming with me? And we had never played before. And just listen to this, you'll see that he's a master of what he does. So we'd never played before. If there are no musicians in the room, you won't have noticed that I changed from minor to major at the end, and he followed it. That's why he plays with Prince. You know, we'd never. That was just off the cuff. If you're not musical, you needn't worry about that. But he responded, and I think great leadership in music is about being what we call emotionally intelligent. We'll explore that in part 3 of this. But emotional intelligence, summarised, is being a master of your own skills, having personal mastery about what's great about yourself, whilst paying attention to the rest of the world. And you notice he was watching. So great musicians are not just good inside, they're paying attention to the rest of the band, listening with every cue that they can find. And great leaders are also not completely self-obsessed with their own system. They're paying attention on the outside as well. So I think there's a direct parallel there. So that. Give it up for Jerry, please.
Yeah, baby, hit me again. Hit me again, baby.
Now see, because Jerry's rather good, I'm going to have to show off, because otherwise we're finished. We need to start part 2. So this is a very quick music lesson. If you're not musical, don't worry, this is not going to hurt. Music always has inbuilt constraints in it. And in music there are 12 notes to choose from, 12 that make up an octave. And often, we use even less than those to write a piece of music, which I shall say more about in a moment. But there are 12 notes in an octave, just know that. Most music has certain conventions. We're used to harmonies, aren't we? Third-part harmonies like the Beatles and various other things. If you listen to opera, you'll know what harmony is even without knowing it. And the point of the matter is, if you want to be a creative musician, you can either bend, which is the adaptive step, or break the conventions. Demonstration. So, 12 notes. That's the 12 notes. But more usually we're used to hearing ones that work together well, like this. Anyone listened to The Sound of Music recently? What's that? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Yeah. So we're used to songs that have, this is the major scale. So that's a convention. There are other conventions. Our blues player here was playing in the blues scale, where he was sort of using a different set of scales. But similar, sort of 3-4 notes put together. And the point of the matter is to bend or break the conventions. Let's try an example. tune, please. Mama killed a man. Is this about Donald Trump? But a gun against, yeah, I think it's going the right. It's obviously 41 years ahead of its time. Come and sing it, please.
You got to start back.
2, 3, 4.
Mama, just kill a man with a gun against his head. Woman, drink and now it's there. Mama, life has just begun.
I've never got that far through the song. Yeah, where's the candle?
How do you make orchestra player and jazz player play together?
That's part 2. With difficulty is the short answer. But actually, you join them together is part 3 of this, because usually musicians are joined together through a common passion for the music they serve, they want to play together, and that looks after their differences. You can't have a music group. I mean, the bass player is usually depressed and got several skin problems, and the drummer's usually late, obviously because they're a drummer. And these people aren't actually, they're very diverse usually in a music group. But you have to have a core passion. I will talk about Richard Branson, that combining passion, purpose and profit. It's what Professor Daniel Pink talks about in A Whole New Mind. Has anyone read that book? So if you have different people, then you need strong leadership to get them all to commit to the purpose, is the straight answer. But there are quite a lot more videos on my website where musicians are talking about dealing with difficult people. I interviewed Guns N' Roses manager recently. And if you manage Axl Rose, we have a guy in the room that deals with serious conflicts in Africa and works for the US military. That's at about the Axl Rose, Guns N' Roses level, I reckon. Dealing with dictators and solving problems between people that won't work together is the stuff of mediators and great leaders.
the drummer bloke. Sam, do it to them. Here's a little bit of advice, you're quite welcome, it's free. Don't do nothing that is cut price, you know what they'll make you be. They will try their tricky device, trap you with the yawn. Put your teeth into a small slice, the cake of little birds. I can't hear you.